Hey guys, Carlo Filippone here, your muscle chef, ready to talk to you about this guy, the chicken pound. What do we do with the chicken pound? We prepare grilled chicken in different flavors, 6 to be exact. If you're serious about bodybuilding and you meal prep, don't go anywhere else. This is the company for you.
Hey, this is the Game Triple H from the WWE. You're watching RxMuscle.com, the truth in bodybuilding.
RX Television on RxMuscle.com. This is Ask Dave, better known as #AskDave. I'm your host, Sadiq Faruqi. This is your 30-minute question and answer show brought to you by Species Nutrition, Liquid Sunrays, Titan Medical Center, and the Chicken Pound. Whatever's on your mind, training, supplementation, diet, IFBB pros, competitions, of course, the Olympia is only 6 weeks away. As we now bring in Dave Palumbo. Dave, we begin this show on a bit of a somber note. We learned last night that David Dirth, who we had on the show just in May, passed away over the course of the last 24 to 36 hours. So I know you're going to make a separate video, but if you could touch on that. And then as well, we want to send our best thoughts out to Charles Glass, who's dealing with some medical issues of his own.
Yeah, first of all, Charles is home and obviously recovering from whatever happened. When he's ready to talk about it, he can discuss that. But I want to just once again send out, everyone loves Charles Glass. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say a bad word about Charles Glass. So Charles is going to be fine. He's just home recovering, resting up a little bit, working 12 hours every single day at Gold's Gym 7 days a week. Sometimes catches up with you. But David Dirth was a shocker for me. I'd spoken to him, I'm trying to think when the last time we were texting was, maybe like a couple weeks ago. And, he seemed like he was doing good. We interviewed him, like you said, back in May. I had always wanted, I'm glad I did it because I kept putting it off and I kept saying, I got to get Dave on the show. And I'm so happy we did it. It was such a popular interview that we actually did a 2-parter, as people might know. If you haven't seen it, you can go back and watch it. He had a wild life. He had a crazy life. He did some crazy stuff. I know he was dealing with some heart issues he had. And then he tore that bicep. If you read his Facebook page, it was like he was working on a horse in Saratoga and he reached back and he tore his bicep and he herniated a disc or something like that. And so he was getting surgery. He got surgery to repair the bicep, and evidently he had some abscesses from the surgery. He had an infection. I guess they were going to go back in and clean it out, or they did. And then while he was in the hospital, I don't know if this was before, after, or during the procedure, he had a heart attack and died. And it's very sad because he seemed like he was just getting his life back in order, but he also seemed at the same time like maybe he was like a little lost. I don't know. I think that it was tough for him after having such a high life. Living at such a high level, making a lot of money, partying a lot, and just he was the bodybuilding rock and roll wild child. I mean, that was his nickname. I mean, and unfortunately, I don't know. Sometimes you get caught up in that lifestyle. It's hard to get out of it. It seemed like he did get out of it, and he was kind of found some peace in his life. And now this happened. So you try to make some kind of sense out of it, and sometimes there is no sense. But I know that he lived his life to his fullest, and I know he didn't live with any regrets, and that's the key. So we send obviously our condolences out to his girlfriend and to his family. And I really like Dave a lot. We hit it off, and he's going to be missed.
A big loss for the bodybuilding world. Of course, our thoughts with David, his friends, and his family. On a brighter note, of course, right now on RxMuscle.com on the YouTube channel, we have our interview with Zach King Khan. That is from yesterday, a completely no-holds-bar interview. And then, of course, Dexter Jackson winning the Tampa Pro over the weekend. Dave Palumbo giving his thoughts as far as what Dexter Jackson's prospects are in 6 weeks at the 2019 Olympia, going for win number 30, 11 years removed from his 2008 Mr. Olympia title. Let's go to the questions. Pardon my allergies have been acting up. The pollen's really, really bad here in New York, but we're going to get through this. First 2 questions from the Dave Palumbo Experience app. The first question, what was your diet and training like in 1991? Now, before you answer that, what stage was that of your bodybuilding career? Is that the beginning? Was that towards, getting into your prime? So answer that part, and then again, your diet training around that time.
Yeah, 91 was really the beginning of my bodybuilding. That's when I was just starting to put size on. I really started about 89, but I didn't know what I was doing until about 91, and then I started really getting into it. I didn't really start taking any drugs till, steroids or anything like that till about 90, almost 92. So, my diet, people got to realize that the early 90s diet was really it was protein and carbs. No one ate fat. We try to avoid fat as much as possible because we thought it's just not something you needed to grow. We didn't know any better. So I ate a lot of tuna, a lot of rice, potatoes, chicken breasts, protein shakes, with just, carbs and protein, weight gain shakes, stuff like that. And that's what I remember I was dating a girl at the time and she was like anorexic. And so I would have these they were called perfect 1100s. They were in these like plastic containers. You just added water and shook it up. It was like sludge in there. It was 1,100 calories. It was mostly sugar. There was a lot of protein in it too, but the protein was like basically like powdered skim milk. And it would destroy your stomach, but at least it was calories. And I would drink like 2 of those a day. And, I didn't even know what I was doing. And then I tell people the story that in 92, I started to realize that, I went to McDonald's with some friends. I hadn't gone to McDonald's in 5 years. And then I discovered fats. And that's when I really started learning about that. But yeah, most of the early diets in the early 90s there was no fat in the diet. It was just protein and carbs. And, depending on how many, how fast your metabolism was, that's how many grams of carbs you ate. Protein was pretty standard at like 1 gram per pound. Then when Scott Connolly started coming out with a lot of his products, the Metric Shake in 92, 93, that's when people started upping their protein a lot. And that's when I went up to like 500 grams of protein. But I still wasn't eating any carbs. Even Connolly back then didn't talk about fats. It was just protein and, moderate carbs. That's what Connolly was into. So that's what I was into. I just devoured tons of protein. And that was the early diets, that were out there.
Well, you mentioned fat, and the second question is right up that alley. How does fat aid in the building and repair of muscle?
Yeah. Now, also, these questions are coming from the Dave Palumbo Experience app. So if you guys like the Ask Dave TV show, and hopefully everyone who's watching has clicked that subscribe button and has turned on their notifications, because you guys don't want to miss any of these shows when they come out. But if you like more of this, I do more of this on my on my Dave Palumbo Experience app, which you can download from the Android or iPhone iTunes store. It's $29 a month. You get access to all the videos, all the articles I've ever written. Plus, I do an exclusive Q&A. I answer all the app members' questions on a daily basis too, in a public forum, so everyone sees all the answers and the questions, which is great because it gives you guys the ability to read other people's questions and answers as well. Plus, we put up weekly workouts up there. So this is something that if you guys want, maybe you can't afford coaching, maybe you like it as an adjunct to coaching. It's kind of like a continuing education type of course. You can do this. But to answer your question about fats, Sid, what people don't realize is they think fats are just a fuel source. But you got to remember that muscles, every cell in our body is made up of a cell membrane that surrounds it. That's the outer coating or the outer portion of the cell, and that's made up of fats, mostly essential fats. And then the inside is made up of protein. So we eat a lot of protein because when we break down the muscle cells from weight training, we got to repair the internal components, which is 90% of the cell. But 10% of the cell is the cell membrane. So if you don't have enough essential fats in your diet and enough good fats, your body doesn't have the raw materials to repair the entire cell. So you limit your body's ability to build and repair muscle because you don't have enough fat. That's why people who don't eat enough fat, when they actually add fat to their diet, they grow. And they don't understand why. They're like, why is fat making me grow? It's not that they're necessarily increasing hormonal production, which could be a component of it, because remember, the cholesterol-laden fats are what our body uses as the precursors to build to make testosterone. But what they're really noticing is the fact that now the body has enough raw materials to repair muscle. That's why when I tell people that the most important macronutrients in the muscle building process is fats and protein, it's because that's what makes up the cells. Carbohydrates are only a fuel source. It's like gasoline in a car. I've said it a million times before. It doesn't build muscle. It's just fuel. You need fat, however, to repair muscle. So you might think you're getting away with, I don't really need fat. I don't need fat in my diet. Well, you're limiting your body's ability to grow. Now, some people eat so much protein that they get the fat they need indirectly from the protein sources. If you eat enough red meat, if you eat enough, fatty fishes like salmon and swordfish, there's fat in those sources, But you're better off targetedly or at least purposely, eating certain types of fat so that you don't have to overeat protein. Because when you overeat protein, you put an overload on your kidneys and your liver to have to break down and deaminate all that extra protein that you don't need. And if you're doing that just to get fat, it's inefficient. You're better off eating a little less protein, a little more fat.
Let's go to our Instagram questions. Again, our handle is official_RxMuscle. Good one here from Excellent187. Dave, I saw an interview in the 2000s that you did with Kevin Levrone, and he said he dieted on fish only in the last couple of weeks of contest prep to improve fat loss and conditioning. Is there any science behind this that would support or disprove his method?
Well, fish is great because fish increases insulin sensitivity. Okay, it's the essential fatty acids in there, the omega-3s in fish, have an insulin sensitizing effect. So if you make your insulin receptors more sensitive, you release less insulin to absorb the same amount of carbohydrates that you might normally do. So let's say if you're eating steak all the time and your insulin sensitivity is not as good, you might be producing extra insulin to absorb the same carbs. Because remember, even if you don't eat carbs in your diet, your body's constantly making glucose in the liver by a process known as gluconeogenesis. You need to release insulin to absorb those glucose molecules. The problem is that if you have to release extra insulin to absorb the same amount of glucose, you theoretically will store more fat or have a tougher time burning fat. So what fish does is it enables you to produce less insulin in your body. The less insulin you have, the easier it is to burn fat. So anyone who's ever done a contest diet, when you switch to all fish, you tend to get leaner faster. The negative is that it doesn't hold you as long, and you could obviously crash. You can start losing weight too fast also, and which I've seen that happen, and then I have to wind up feeding people more. So I only go to really all fish if I'm in a desperate situation where, the person's not losing fast enough, they're a little behind. Levrone was one of these guys that people don't realize. They think, well, he was just a genetic freak. He suffered. He would eat fish and like some green beans, 5-6 times a day and do 2 hours of cardio, and that's how he got in shape. That's why he was so conditioned. It wasn't that he was just a genetic freak and he could eat and he was eating McDonald's every day. That's not how it worked. And Levrone would grow on that kind of a diet. That was his genetics. He could eat no carbs and put muscle on it. But that was his gift. But the bottom line is the reason why a lot of bodybuilders, especially in the early 90s, would switch to fish is because it is more efficient at helping you to burn fat.
Interesting question here, Dave. And again, talking about how Dexter Jackson just won the 2019 Tampa Pro. And after the show, he did an interview with another media outlet talking about how, he's only had 2 coaches his entire career, and talked about how he found it kind of odd that, pros or amateurs or whatever, they lose a show, they switch their coach. If they win a show, they still switch their coach. Anyway, so it's a pretty long question. I'll try to run through pretty quickly. Why aren't bodybuilders these days more straightforward? No one says that they're competing, whether they're injured. He cites Kai, Big Ramy, even Phil, as far as whether or not, they're going to compete this year or not, so on and so forth. I always said Dexter is the real deal, always straight and keeping his fans updated with everything going on. Why don't we see, it goes on to say passion, but let's just talk about the mindset, Dave, and I guess why bodybuilders like a Dexter, who is a bit of a throwback, why you don't have that same straightforwardness that we're seeing so much of in this run to the Olympia.
I don't know I think guys are pretty straightforward. Dexter's just like a real guy. He's just like, this is the way it is, and this is what I do, and I don't care if you like it or not, and that's always been his shtick, He's a throwback from the 90s, like you said. He really has bridged the generations from back when, Dorian was winning Olympias to now. He's seen it all. He's been there. He's from that generation where they competed in multiple shows a year, Milos, guys like that would do, 15 shows in the same year, one after the other. Flex Wheeler did a lot of shows back in the day, and he was great. They would do 5 shows in a row. They would do the whole European tour. They would do the early part of the season because they wanted to compete, because they wanted to make money, because they wanted to be out there. And that's what bodybuilding was all about. Nowadays, guys are like, oh, I'm so exhausted from dieting. Oh, I dieted for 16 weeks. I can only do 1 show. It's too exhausting. I can't get on an airplane. People are complainers now. Dexter could probably still do 5 shows a year if he really wanted to. There's no reason for him to at his age. At his age, he's cherry picking the shows he wants to do. He would like to win that Olympia again. I know he would. I know he's dying to win that Olympia, and why not? He has a chance to do it. One more time. It would be great, right? One more Olympia, and that would cement his legacy. Maybe as the greatest bodybuilder of all time. Maybe not physique-wise, but certainly accomplishment-wise.
Let's go to Shadwater Fit. I know you're not the biggest fan of insulin, but if you were to use insulin, Humulin R, and growth hormone during contest prep, when would you utilize injections, and when/how far out would you cut during contest prep?
Yeah, I'm actually a big insulin fan. I'm not a big insulin fan pre-contest, because if you're eating a low-carb diet, you don't really need insulin. I mean, insulin's a fat storage hormone. I just got done telling you that eating fish makes you lose weight faster because you're more insulin sensitive. If you're taking insulin, you're going to become less insulin sensitive. Okay, so you really don't need insulin when you're dieting because your carb intake is lower. No one is very few people are dieting on a super high carb diet. Unless you have a ridiculously genetically gifted metabolism, you're probably on lower carbs or moderate carbs or no carbs. So if that's the case, why take insulin? There's no reason to. Now, off season, I love insulin. I think it's great. It helps it push all those, especially if you're eating an enormous amount of food. When I was eating 12 times a day, if I didn't take insulin, I never would have gotten as big as I did because I would never have absorbed all the food. So you really have to go by, what you're doing. If you're eating an enormous amount of calories, protein-wise and carb-wise, insulin probably is helpful. If, however, you're dieting and trying to get as lean as possible, throwing insulin into the mix is probably not the smartest move unless you have a ridiculously fast metabolism and you have to eat a lot of food while you're dieting. But how many people fit that category? 2 or 3 in the entire bodybuilding world? So for most people, insulin is not useful. Not while dieting.
Illmatic New York says, now I don't know if I'm going to use the brand name only because I'm trying to look it up and I can't necessarily find it. Anyway, says he's seen Phil Heath training with a complex Electro-stim machine. Now, he recently saw Brad Rowe training with a similar device, but it does not do electric stim. It's a little different. Also, Dexter Jackson just claimed that this device improved his quads and made them bigger, as we can see from his last show he won in Florida. What do you think about training with these machines, Electro-stim, or I'll use it's called the Newbie. I don't know if you've heard of that.
I don't know. When I was back in the early 90s, they had a machine. They had this ad, and it was like in Muscle and Fitness and all the magazines, and it was this like big. He looked like a big Russian guy, and they had all the little stim things pads like on his whole body, and he was big guy. I wish I could find that guy. It would be a good interview just to ask him about that ad he did. And everyone just assumed that the pads were making him get huge. So when I was in med school, one of my roommates had one of those little machines, and he wasn't really using it. He's like, you can borrow it. So I was trying to get my calves bigger. So I would study for 4 hours every night, for med school. When I would be out studying, I'd put the pads on my calves. There was 4 of them. So I had one on each head of each gastrocnemius. And I would literally for 2 hours let those things go. I figured 2 hours, if I could take I cranked it up as high as it would go, and it makes your muscle contract. I'm like, I'll just deal with it. I'm studying anyway. It's dead time. And I don't think it built any muscle whatsoever, but I thought it did, so that's all that mattered, right? And but it was, I don't think those machines do anything, especially for a big bodybuilder. Now, what they're good for is rehab. Like if you have, let's say you get, like when I tore my quad, when I would go to rehab, and do my physical therapy, at the end of the session, they would put the electro-stim on that muscle, and they would let it passively be contracting using the electrical stim. And that's good because it's making the muscle contract in a way that I couldn't necessarily do because I was still rehabbing it. I couldn't really subject it to heavy forces. So good for rehab, probably not good to build muscle.
Interesting theoretical one here from Jason Baker. And before I ask you if you think it's just not possible to do so, please feel free. How should tall guys, 6'2" and over, modify and structure their training for maximum gains?
Well, it depends. I know tall guys that have, short torsos and they don't have to modify anything. And then I know tall guys that have really long torsos and short legs and they don't, they don't have to. It's usually when guys are really tall and have the long arms and long legs, they got to change the exercises because the typical exercises just don't work. For a guy who's only 5'10", you know, when I competed, I have very long arms and very long legs. I have a short torso. So for me, doing like bicep curls, I never really felt barbell curls. It just didn't work because my arm was like too long. Whereas if you get a guy with like Lee Priest who has a short arm, he can do bicep curls and his range of motion is short, but he feels it because it's all very concentrated. So I found that single arm movements work better for me. So the modifications are based on your body structure. So when you're taller, if you have long legs and long arms, you might have to do different types of exercises. What I tell people is try the conventional exercises. If you don't feel them, then you're gonna have to modify it. In other words, I never really felt skull crushers. You know, guys use skull crushers for big triceps. I never felt them. I felt more pain in my shoulders than I did in my triceps. So I stopped doing them. And guess what? My triceps didn't get smaller. They got better. So you got to do what you feel. If you don't feel the muscle working in a certain exercise, don't do it. There's no absolute must-have exercises. The one exercise that I would say is really probably something you should I think everyone can do is squats. I don't think that there's any reason why there's any person's body type that shouldn't be able to do squats, assuming you don't have an injury in your back or something like that. So it's one of those universal exercises that everyone can do.
Let's go to D Strauss 92. Dave, I hear and read of guys running 300 mg of Clomid for the first few days of PCT to, quote, kickstart it. This is an insane amount to me. What do you think and why?
Well, look, I'll tell you one thing about Clomid. I found that when I did about 50 to 100 milligrams a day when I was doing my pregnancy protocol, I kind of felt, I wouldn't say depressed, I wasn't depressed. It kind of blunted my sex drive a little bit. I don't know if that has anything to do with the fact that it's a synthetic estrogen. A lot of guys complain that they don't really have that much of a sex drive. It's not that you can perform, but it's just like, you kind of like, it messes with your mood a little bit. So 50 milligrams a day does that to me. So I can't imagine using 300 milligrams. Well, you got to remember, all Clomid is an estrogen receptor blocker. Okay, so, you know, when they give women a prescribed dosage of tamoxifen, which does the same thing, it blocks estrogen receptors for breast cancer. Now think about it, this is breast cancer. They want to block the estrogen receptor so that a woman who produces a ton of estrogen the estrogen won't be able to get to the receptor. 10 milligrams twice a day is the prescribed dosage for a woman with breast cancer. Why a bodybuilder would need more than that, I have no inkling, because there's no way, even if you're taking 3,000 milligrams of testosterone a week, there's no way you're producing more estrogen than a woman is cranking out of her ovaries. So I think people go overboard on these things, and I don't think taking more is necessarily better, of Clomid or of tamoxifen in that matter.
J.M. Powell, how much is too much cardio, especially getting ready for a show? Are there any telltale signs?
There's no such thing as too much cardio if you need it, right? If you're 2 weeks out from a show and you got 10 pounds to lose, 3 hours might sound like a lot, but it's not a lot of cardio. If you have no pounds to lose, if you have 1 pound to lose and you're 2 weeks out, 2 hours of cardio a day is probably too much. So it depends on what you have to accomplish, you know what I mean? I always say you want to be able to do the least amount of cardio possible, obviously, because that's the least stress in your body. But if you need to do it to lose the weight, then you got to do it, you know? And so that's why my cardio that I always give out to people is always steady state, lower intensity cardio to ensure that you don't lose muscle, okay? This way you can give people an hour or 2 hours or even 3 hours at some point, and without worrying about losing muscle. If you're doing high intensity cardio and you're doing a lot of it, you have a much better chance of losing muscle because high intensity cardio requires carbohydrates as a fuel source as opposed to fats. And if you're eating a low carb diet, you're invariably going to convert some protein that the body is going to cannibalize from muscle tissue and turn that into carbs to fuel the cardio session, which is not something you want to do. That's ridiculous, right? And that's why I tell people keep the intensity level low. You can't spot reduce fat. If you have fat on your butt, doing the stepper or the Stairmaster for 3 hours is not going to make your butt any leaner. It'll burn fat equally throughout your body, but it's not going to, just because you're walking and taking deep steps doesn't mean your glutes are going to get leaner. You don't spot reduce fat. That's not how it works.
Fidel El Nasser, what do you think about adding test boosters in a PCT program?
I love it. I have all my athletes, and I know I probably have a lot of people who just watch the show, taking my Testalize product, 3 pills twice a day, during PCT and throughout the off period that they're on, because what it does is it optimizes their hormone levels. It makes testosterone high, it keeps DHT and estrogen low, and we know when estrogen is low, it raises natural endogenous testosterone. So it's a testosterone optimizer is what it is, and it balances those hormone levels, and so you feel better. It also blocks DHT, so you don't lose hair, you don't break out as much. It's a great product, and most, like I said, most steroid-using people, whether they be men or women, tend to use the Testalize when they go off. Now, in women, it's not going to raise their testosterone level, but it will keep estrogen at bay, and it'll keep DHT levels lower. A lot of women notice hair loss, hair thinning, acne when they come off because their hormone levels are all over the place. It works really well for that.
Inza, has there ever been a cycle where you felt, quote, oh, this is bad, really bad in terms of negative effects? First, your experience, and then I guess I'll add to that. If somebody does feel that, what would you advise?
Yeah, well, if you feel terrible in a cycle, then stop the cycle, or stop the compounds you're using. I tried probably at least 8 times in my career to use Anadrol. Okay, 50 milligrams a day. I tried it. I could never get through more than 3 weeks. I never made it the full 4 weeks. I always wanted to do 4 weeks of Anadrol. I figured I'd grow from it. It killed my appetite. It made me feel nauseous, and I got a sticking pain in my side. I don't know if it was from the Anadrol, it was just coincidental, but it happened every single time I took it. And I know other people that tell me the same thing. So at some point, halfway through my career, probably in the late 90s, I just said, you know what? I'm not using it anymore. Why should I use it? I don't need it. There's a million injectables I can use to do the same thing. And I stopped using it. And I'll tell you, the only other time that I felt really crappy on a cycle was the last 2 weeks before a show when I used to use halotestin. I stopped using it at the end of my career, but in the beginning of my career, before they had Trenbolone, I would use halotestin the last 2 weeks. I felt miserable on that stuff. I was angry. I felt like my stomach hurt. I don't know. I just didn't feel good on it. It was just one of these things. It's because it's a toxic oral that's heavily androgenic. And that's not something that your body wants to have in it for long periods of time. So those were 2 drugs I just didn't like. And the way I solved the problem is I stopped taking it. And that was the end of it. Never had a problem again.
Alexander Jeramazov, should I eat my carbs before or after training while on contest prep? Let's say I have 80 grams of carbs for the day. Should I eat them before or after training, assuming I'm working out at 8 p.m.?
I would say yes to that. I would spread them out. If you have 80 grams, eat 20 grams, 4 times a day. Pick 4 meals. Usually I have my guys do 4 meals and 2 shakes anyway. So I would do the 20 grams with 4 of the food meals, and then the shakes I would just do protein, fat, or whatever whatever you're doing. For those, if you're going to do food and you want to just leave the carbs out and do vegetables and protein or whatever you're doing, I like to spread them out. I don't like these people who say, all right, I'm going to do 40 before I train and 40 after I train. Well, what about the rest of the day? You're going to feel miserable the rest of the day. It doesn't matter. It's like putting gas in your tank. Does it matter if you fill the tank up in one sitting or if you fill it up throughout the day? No, you still have the same amount of gas in your tank. That's what you're doing. You're filling up your glycogen stores. The difference is that while you're filling the tank as a person, it feels good to eat the food, right? If you can eat carbs 4 times a day as opposed to once a day, you're going to feel better, okay? You're going to be in a better mood. Because as we know, carbohydrates, increase the feel-good serotonin hormones in our brain. So I would spread it out.
We'll try to knock these 3 out real quick. The Bonafide Beast, I don't know if you know this for a fact, but will the Olympia continue the People's Champ contest that they had last year? He hasn't heard any official word on it yet.
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I would suspect they would, but I can ask my good friend Dan Solomon. Maybe we'll get him on the show and ask him about that. I would think so. They started it last year. It seemed like a good idea.
Yeah.
Why not?
No, of course. And Ruli, who won the People's Award, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Fitting recipient. Let's go to Bilal Hamide. They wanted to ask, what was the minimum protein intake for the bulking season when you, I guess during your competing days, were trying to put on mass? So minimal protein intake during bulking season.
For me, it was always 1.5 grams per pound. So if I weighed 300 pounds, there was no way I was eating under 450 grams of protein. And it was actually closer to 600 grams. I found that, especially like I was saying, in those early to mid 90s when I was really working for Scott Conley at Metrics, he was like, you really want to push almost 2 grams of protein per pound. And that's what, you don't feel so good when you're eating 600 grams of protein, but when I got it up that high, I grew. So, but like I said, I really believe a lot of that had to do with the fact that I wasn't eating enough fat in my diet. So I think if you're eating enough fat, you can do 1.5 grams per pound that you weigh, and I think that's perfect.
J Macon 10. In today's bodybuilding, everyone seems to have a coach. If Dave could coach 2 people, one from the past, one from today, who would they be?
That's easy, the 2 people, because I would pick the 2 people that are the most gifted with the best work ethic, which would be, Dorian Yates and Ronnie Coleman. I mean, there's no brainer right there, right? 2 great Mr. Olympias with crazy work ethic who train like animals in the gym, and they're machines. They listen to anything you tell them to do. Those have to be the 2 best clients.
Last question from Donnie Davies. Why do you think so many people online, content creators, are seemingly obsessed with talking about bodybuilding drugs?
Because it's cool, right? I mean, everyone wants to be an expert in what drugs work and what drugs do this and do that. That's like the cool thing to do nowadays, right? Everyone has all their little abbreviations in Tren and VAR and SLIN, and it's like people think they sound important if they can speak the lingo. I breed snakes, as you know, and when I got into snake breeding, there's different genes in each snake. So like a spider ball python and a pastel ball python, if you had the 2 genes in the same snake, it would be called what? A spider pastel. But they decided to call it a bumblebee, okay? That's the abbreviation for that. So a bumblebee is a spider with a pastel. I had to learn the vocabulary. I didn't know what anything was. I'm like, what the hell is that? So it's the same thing with steroids. I think when these guys speak the vocabulary or they talk about drugs, they sound more important, and so that people are looking for coaches say, oh, that guy knows what he's talking about. I'm going to hire him. And I think that people think that the drugs are really what builds the physiques, and they forgot the fact that you have to train heavy and you have to actually eat food or eat the right foods to put the size on. That art has been lost. And the reason is because there's so much information about drugs now out there, whereas before in the early 90s there was no internet, it was just magazines, and even the magazines didn't want to talk about it. Bill Phillips was the first magazine, Muscle Media 2000, to really talk about drugs. So you couldn't get all the information you got about drugs was like from guys like me in the gym, and we would share knowledge with each other. So the thing that you could discuss, however, was diet and training, and that's why that was the heyday of training. That was the Menser guy. The Menser was out there with the heavy duty training. Dorian was pushing that. Everyone was talking about that. People were doing phone consults with Mike Menser on the phone, on a telephone. He would have a card swiping machine there. You give him your credit card and you do a consult, and he would talk to you about how to train. I mean, that's how important it was. And diet was really important. Everyone wanted to know how much protein, where you get the protein from, what protein shakes to eat, what foods you should eat. That was what we were consumed with. And because of that, I think that's why the 90s bodybuilders were so good, because the training and diet were on point. They used drugs. We used drugs, but it was not, everyone used the same amounts of everything, the same amount of tests, the same amount of GH, the same amount of this. Everyone kind of was in the same ballpark. Then what happened was, the internet came out and drug knowledge became more available via message boards. Then people started selling it online. Then people started making it and selling it online. And then people forgot about training and they forgot about diet, and they thought, it's the drugs. It was always the drugs. What drugs do I need? So when a guy gets into bodybuilding, he wants to do his first show, he's like, what drugs do I have to take? He doesn't even think about the diet. He's hiring a coach to find out what drugs. I have people contact me and say, Dave, I'm a natural bodybuilder. I want to take the step to the next level. That's why I'm hiring you, which is smart to get someone who knows what they're talking about. But I'm like, well, what's your diet like? Well, I eat like crap. They'll even tell me I eat like crap. I eat McDonald's. I eat this. I eat that. I really don't have a structured. I'm like, you have no structured eating and you have no structured training, but you want to take drugs. So I think all 3 of those components are equally important. But people have forgotten about the training and the diet as being as important as it really is. But those really are the 2 most important. The drugs make everything work better, but those 2 components are the most important.
That's going to do it for this episode of Ask Dave, brought to you by Species Nutrition, Liquid Sunrays, Titan Medical, and The Chicken Pound. For our producer, Tyler Shore, and Dave Palumbo, I'm Sadiq Faruqi. We'll see you next time.